On a freezing winter night, a gaunt black man quietly returned a can of baby formula to the cashier. His hands trembled, not from the cold, but from shame. "I'm sorry. I don't have enough." No one offered sympathy, just impatient sighs and judgmental glances. But one woman saw everything. Rachel Monroe, a wealthy CFO who had everything except a reason to care, stood frozen in line behind him. What she did next would change both their lives forever and uncover a secret buried for nearly 4 decades. Sometimes kindness isn't coincidence. It's destiny catching up. The fluorescent lights of Franklin's grocery hummed overhead as William Rachel stood at the checkout counter, bouncing his 4-month-old son gently against his chest. Eli had finally stopped fussing, his tiny fingers clutching the worn fabric of his father's jacket. William placed the can of Nutramegan on the conveyor belt, the only formula his son could digest without breaking into hives. $42 for one can. He had calculated it down to the penny, scraping together every bit of cash from his last delivery job. The cashier, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, scanned the item without looking up. $42.17. William pulled out his debit card. His hand was steady, but his heart wasn't. He swiped. The machine beeped. The cashier frowned at her screen. "Card declined." William felt the words like a punch to his stomach. "Can you try it again? There should be enough." She swiped again, her fingers moving with practiced indifference. The machine beeped once more. Still declined. "You got another card?" He didn't. William reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled collection of bills and coins, everything he had left until his next paycheck. He counted it twice, his fingers numb. $35.23. Behind him, the line was growing. A woman in a designer coat checked her watch and sighed loudly. An elderly man muttered something about people holding up the line. William could feel their eyes on him, their judgment pressing against his back like a physical weight. "I'm short," he said quietly. "I'm sorry. I'll put it back." The cashier shrugged and set the formula aside without a word. No sympathy, no offer to help, just the mechanical processing of another transaction that didn't go through. William turned to leave, Eli stirring against his chest. The baby whimpered, and William pressed his lips to his son's forehead, whispering words of comfort he wasn't sure he believed himself. 3 people back in line, Rachel Monroe watched the entire scene unfold. She had stopped at this grocery store on impulse. Her usual organic market was closed, and she needed milk for her morning coffee. A simple errand, nothing more. But she couldn't look away from the man at the counter, the way his shoulders curved inward when the card was declined, the way he counted his money with the precision of someone who knew exactly how little he had, the way he apologized, not for causing a scene, but simply for existing in a space where he couldn't afford to belong. Rachel knew that formula. Her niece had the same allergy, and her sister had complained endlessly about the cost. She knew what it meant for a baby who couldn't tolerate regular formula. She knew what happened when they didn't get it. The man walked past her, his son tucked close to his chest. For a moment, their eyes met. His were dark brown, filled with a quiet dignity that refused to break despite the humiliation he had just endured. Rachel felt something strange, a flicker of recognition she couldn't explain. Something about his face, the shape of his jaw, the set of his brow, reminded her of someone, but she couldn't place it. Then he looked away and kept walking. Rachel thought of her mother. Eleanor Monroe had been dead for 5 years now, but her voice still echoed in Rachel's memory at the strangest moments. Especially that story, the one she told every Thanksgiving, every birthday, every time she wanted to remind Rachel of what really mattered. "I was 23 years old and 6 months pregnant with you when that fire broke out. I thought I was going to die in that hallway, and then a man appeared out of nowhere, a black man, younger than me with the kindest eyes I'd ever seen. He carried me down 4 flights of stairs through smoke so thick I couldn't breathe. And when we got outside, I turned to thank him, and he was already gone. Just walked away, never even told me his name. Eleanor had spent decades trying to find that man. She never did. Kindness isn't something you repay, her mother used to say. It's something you pass on. Rachel watched the man push through the grocery store doors into the bitter cold outside. Snow was falling heavily now, coating the parking lot in white. She made her decision. Stepping out of line, she walked quickly to the customer service desk and purchased a gift card. $100. Then she headed for the exit, her heels clicking against the tile floor. She found him in the parking lot, struggling to unlock an old sedan while holding his baby. The wind cut through the night like a blade, and the child had started to cry. "Excuse me?" The man turned, his body tensing. Rachel recognized that posture, the instinctive preparation for confrontation that came from a lifetime of being approached by strangers who rarely had good intentions. "You dropped this inside?" Rachel said, holding out the gift card. He looked at it, then at her. "I didn't drop anything." "Then maybe someone meant for you to find it." His jaw tightened. "I don't take charity." "It's not charity." Rachel glanced at the baby, at the tiny face scrunched up against the cold. It's one parent recognizing another who's trying their best. "I don't have kids," the man said. "I mean, I do. Obviously." He looked down at his son, and something in his expression softened. "I just mean, you don't know me. You don't owe me anything." "You're right. I don't know you. But I know that baby needs formula tonight, and I know you're not going to get it standing out here in the snow." The man stared at her for a long moment. Rachel could see the war playing out behind his eyes. Pride versus necessity, dignity versus desperation. She had seen that look before, in the mirror, on the faces of people who had lost everything except their self-respect. "My name is William," he said finally. "William Rachel." "Rachel!" He took the gift card. His fingers were calloused, the hands of someone who had worked hard his entire life. "Thank you," William said. The word seemed to cost him something. "You don't have to thank me. Just take care of that little one." William nodded once, then turned back to his car. Rachel watched him secure his son in the car seat, his movements gentle despite the cold. Then he went back into the store. She didn't wait to see him come out. She walked to her own car, a sleek black Mercedes parked 3 rows away, and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. Her hands were shaking. She pulled out her phone and opened her photos, scrolling until she found the image she was looking for. It was old, scanned from a physical photograph her mother had kept in a frame by her bedside until the day she died. The picture showed a young woman, Eleanor, barely out of college, standing in front of a burned-out building. Beside her was a man in a firefighter's jacket, his face partially obscured by smoke and shadow, but his eyes were visible, dark brown, kind. On the back of the original photo, her mother had written, "Whitmore Building, 1986. The man who saved my life. I never knew his name." Rachel stared at the image for a long time. Then she looked up at the grocery store, where William Rachel was probably buying formula for his son at this very moment. There was something about his face, the same strong jaw, the same gentle eyes, like looking at a younger version of the man in her mother's photograph. She shook her head and started the car. Coincidence, it had to be. But as she pulled out of the parking lot, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just stepped into something much bigger than a simple act of kindness. Back in his apartment that night, William fed his son the formula and watched him drift off to sleep. Then he sat in the darkness of his small living room, staring at the wall where his father's certificate hung in a cheap wooden frame. "For acts of bravery in the Whitmore Building fire, 1986, the faded text read. "Presented to James Rachel." His father had never talked about that night. He had just done what needed to be done and walked away, like it was nothing. William looked at the gift card on the table. $100 from a stranger who didn't know him, didn't owe him, had nothing to gain. "I don't take charity," he had told her. But his father's voice echoed in his memory, rough and certain. "There's no shame in accepting help, son. The shame is in not passing it on when you can." William picked up the card and put it in his wallet. Tomorrow he would find a way to pay it back. The morning after the grocery store, William woke before dawn. Eli was still sleeping in the second-hand crib beside his bed, his small chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. The formula had worked. No rash, no crying, no emergency trip to the clinic. William sat on the edge of his mattress and stared at the gift card on his nightstand. $100 from a woman named Rachel, a stranger who had seen him at his lowest and chosen kindness instead of judgment. He thought about his father. James Rachel had worked 2 jobs for most of William's childhood, firefighter by day, security guard by night. He never complained. He never asked for help, and when the lung cancer finally took him 14 years ago, he died the same way he lived, quietly, without fuss, without burdening anyone. William had been just 18, barely a man, forced to grow up overnight. "A man earns his way," his father used to say. "That's how you keep your dignity." William had tried to live by those words. He had worked construction, delivery, warehouse jobs, anything that paid. When his wife Maya died giving birth to Eli, he had buried her with money he didn't have and kept moving forward because stopping wasn't an option. But last night, he had accepted charity. And no matter how Rachel had framed it, that's what it was. He needed to find a way to pay it back. Not the money, he knew he couldn't afford that, but something. A gesture that would restore the balance. 3 weeks later, William found a job listing that caught his attention. Sterling Capital Group was hiring warehouse workers for their distribution center on the east side of the city. The pay was decent. The hours were flexible enough to work around Eli's daycare schedule, and most importantly, it was steady work. He applied and got the job within a week. What William didn't know, couldn't have known, was that Sterling Capital Group was the investment firm where Rachel Monroe served as chief financial officer. Rachel's days had settled back into their familiar rhythm after that winter night. Board meetings, financial reports, conference calls that stretched into the evening. Her penthouse apartment waited for her each night, immaculate and silent. She had tried to forget about the man in the grocery store, but his face kept returning to her thoughts at unexpected moments, during a quarterly review, while signing documents, in the quiet hours before sleep. There was something about him that nagged at her memory, something she couldn't quite place. One afternoon, 3 weeks after the grocery store encounter, Rachel conducted a routine inspection of the company's distribution center. It was standard procedure, walking the floor, observing operations, ensuring everything met corporate standards. She was reviewing inventory logs with the floor manager when she saw him, William Rachel, stacking boxes onto a pallet, his movements efficient and focused. He didn't notice her watching from across the warehouse floor. Rachel felt her breath catch. "Who's that?" she asked the floor manager, nodding toward William. "New hire, William Rachel. Started 2 weeks ago. Good worker. Never late, never complains. Got a kid at home, I think." Rachel watched William work through his lunch break, eating a sandwich with one hand while video calling someone on his phone with the other. She was too far away to hear the conversation, but she could see him smiling, making faces at the screen. His son, she realized. He was checking on his son. Something shifted in her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. "Send me his employee file," she told the floor manager. "I want to review his performance." That evening, Rachel sat in her office and read through William Rachel's personnel records. Single father, wife deceased, emergency contact, none. Previous employment, delivery driver, construction laborer, warehouse associate. Education, 2 years of community college, dropped out. She closed the file and stared out at the city lights. Her phone buzzed. A calendar reminder. Mom's anniversary. Flowers for grave. 5 years since Eleanor Monroe had passed. 5 years since Rachel had sat beside her mother's hospital bed and listened to that story one final time. "Promise me something," her mother had whispered, her voice thin as paper. "Promise me you'll find a way to pass it on, the kindness that man showed me. Don't let it end with us." Rachel had promised. And then she had buried herself in work, in success, in the accumulation of wealth and power that somehow never filled the emptiness her mother's death had left behind. She looked at William Rachel's file again. Maybe this was her chance to keep that promise. 2 months passed. Rachel watched William from a distance, observing his progress through performance reviews and supervisor reports. He was promoted from general warehouse worker to inventory specialist. He earned it. Every evaluation noted his reliability, his attention to detail, his quiet determination. She never approached him directly. She told herself it was to protect his dignity, to avoid any appearance of favoritism. But part of her knew the truth. She wasn't ready to explain why she cared. Then came the accident. It happened on a Tuesday evening near the end of William's shift. A forklift malfunctioned, and a stack of heavy crates came crashing down. William managed to push another worker out of the way, but his ankle twisted badly in the process. The floor supervisor called it in as a minor workplace injury. Standard protocol: first aid, incident report, recommendation for medical evaluation. Rachel received the notification on her phone during a dinner meeting with investors. She excused herself before dessert was served. 20 minutes later, she walked into the warehouse's first aid station. William was sitting on a metal chair, his left ankle wrapped in an ice pack. He looked up when she entered, and recognition flickered across his face. "You," he said quietly. "The woman from the supermarket?" Rachel nodded. "And you're the man who tried to return my gift card 3 times through HR." Despite the pain in his ankle, William almost smiled. "The floor manager kept telling me there was no record of any gift card. I figured someone was playing a joke on me." "No joke. I just didn't want to make things complicated." Rachel glanced at his ankle. "How bad is it?" "Doctor says it's a sprain. Nothing broken. I'll be fine." "Can you drive?" William hesitated. "My car's in the shop. I was going to call a cab. I'll take you home." He started to refuse. She could see it forming on his lips, that automatic rejection of help that had become his armor. But then he looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression changed. "Okay," he said. "Thank you." The drive to William's apartment took 20 minutes through light traffic. They talked about small things: the weather, the city, Eli's latest developmental milestones. Rachel learned that the baby was now 6 months old, that he had started solid foods, that he laughed whenever William made a particular sound with his mouth. "He's got his mother's smile," William said, and then fell silent. Rachel didn't push. William lived in a small apartment complex on the south side, the kind of building that had seen better decades. Rachel helped him up the stairs to the 2nd floor, his arm draped over her shoulder for balance. Inside, the apartment was small but clean. A worn couch, a kitchen table with 2 chairs, a crib visible through the bedroom door. And on the wall, directly across from the entrance, a framed certificate. Rachel stopped walking. "For acts of bravery in the Whitmore Building Fire, 1986, she read aloud. "Presented to James Rachel." Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, distant, like it was coming from somewhere outside her body. William lowered himself onto the couch, wincing. "That was my father. He was a volunteer firefighter back then, helped pull people out of a burning apartment building." Rachel couldn't move. Her eyes were fixed on that certificate, on the name written in formal script, James Rachel. He never talked about it much, William continued, not noticing her stillness. Just said it was what anybody would have done. He passed away 14 years ago, lung cancer. Doctors said it was probably from all the smoke he inhaled over the years. Rachel finally found her voice. Your father, did he ever mention the people he saved? Not really. Why? Rachel reached into her purse with trembling hands. She pulled out her phone and opened her photos, scrolling until she found the scanned image of her mother's photograph. This woman, she said, turning the screen toward William. Do you recognize her? William leaned forward, squinting at the image. A young woman standing in front of a burned-out building, a man in a firefighter's jacket beside her. That's the Whitmore building, he said slowly. I recognize it from the photos my mom kept, and that man, he looked closer, and his face changed. That's my father. That's my dad. Rachel felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. The woman in the photo is my mother, she said. Eleanor Monroe. She was 23 years old and 6 months pregnant when that fire broke out. Your father carried her down 4 flights of stairs. He saved her life. He saved my life. William stared at the phone, then at Rachel, then back at the phone. His mouth opened, but no words came out. My mother spent nearly 40 years trying to find him, Rachel continued. She wanted to thank him. She wanted to tell him that because of what he did, I got to exist. But she never found him. He just walked away. That sounds like my dad, William said softly. He never wanted recognition. He said helping people wasn't something you did for credit. You did it because it was right. Rachel sat down on the couch beside him, still clutching her phone. That night at the grocery store, I didn't know who you were. I just saw a father trying to take care of his son, and I thought about what my mother always told me, that kindness is something you pass on. William looked at the certificate on the wall, then at Rachel. So this whole time, all of this, it wasn't random. No, Rachel whispered. I don't think it was. They sat together in silence for a long moment. Outside, the city hummed with distant traffic. Inside, 2 strangers who had been connected across decades finally understood why. Your father saved my mother without asking for anything, Rachel said. Let me do the same for you. William shook his head. I told you before, I don't take charity. This isn't charity. Rachel turned to face him fully. This is a debt I've owed for nearly 40 years. Not to you, to your father. And since he's not here to collect, I'm asking you to let me honor his memory. William looked at his son's crib through the bedroom door. Eli was sleeping peacefully, unaware of the magnitude of what was unfolding in the next room. What did you have in mind? Over the following months, Rachel worked quietly behind the scenes. She convinced Sterling Capital's board of directors to fund a new initiative, a foundation that would provide job training, child care support, and housing assistance for single-parent families from underserved communities. She named it the Rachel Foundation. William knew nothing of its connection to him at first. He was simply one of hundreds of applicants who qualified for the program's first cohort. He received job training certification, a promotion to shift supervisor, and access to subsidized housing in a safer neighborhood. Eli started at a better daycare. William no longer had to choose between formula and rent. But as the months went on, people began to notice the connection between the program's name and its most visible success story. Rachel Foundation, one of William's co-workers said during a break. That's your name, isn't it? And I heard the CFO personally approved your promotion. What's going on between you two? William ignored the comment, but the whispers grew louder. Local media picked up the story. Sterling CFO's mystery connection to foundation beneficiary. The articles were carefully worded to avoid direct accusations, but the implications were clear. They're saying you're sleeping with the CFO, William's supervisor told him one afternoon, looking uncomfortable. I don't believe it, but corporate is asking questions. The board of directors launched a formal investigation into Rachel Monroe's management of foundation funds. They subpoenaed her emails, her financial records, her calendar entries from the past year. William was suspended with pay pending the investigation's conclusion. Rachel sat in her office late one evening, staring at the letter from the board's legal counsel. Potential conflict of interest, appearance of impropriety, fiduciary responsibility. She had known this might happen. She had hoped it wouldn't. Her phone rang. William. They suspended me, he said. His voice was flat, exhausted. Rachel, I can't let you lose everything because of me. You're not the reason I might lose anything. I made my choices. Then let me make mine. I'll withdraw from the program. I'll tell them whatever they need to hear to clear your name. And then what? You go back to counting pennies for formula? Eli goes back to that daycare where they lost him for 20 minutes last spring? William was silent. I didn't help you so you could give it all back the moment things got hard, Rachel said. I helped you because it was right, because your father did something extraordinary and he deserved to have that legacy honored. Pulling out now doesn't protect me. It just means everything we built was for nothing. So what do we do? Rachel looked out her window at the city below. Thousands of lives, thousands of stories, thousands of people who would never know or care about the choices she made in this moment. We tell the truth, she said. All of it. The board meeting was scheduled for the following week. Rachel would have to explain everything. The grocery store, the photograph, the connection she had discovered to a man who had died 14 years ago. She wasn't sure they would believe her. She wasn't sure it would matter if they did. But for the first time in 5 years, Rachel Monroe felt like she was finally keeping the promise she had made to her mother. Whatever came next, she would face it. She owed that much to James Rachel. The boardroom was silent except for the scratch of pens and the soft hum of the air conditioning. 12 faces stared at Rachel from across the polished mahogany table: investors, shareholders, legal counsel. At the far end sat William Rachel, still in his work clothes, looking like a man awaiting sentencing. The chairman of the board, a silver-haired man named Walter Pemberton, cleared his throat. Ms. Monroe, you understand the gravity of these allegations. The board has evidence suggesting an inappropriate personal relationship between yourself and a foundation beneficiary. Before we proceed with a formal vote, do you have anything to say? Rachel stood. Her hands were steady, but her heart was racing. I do. She looked at William. He gave her a small nod. Before William says anything, before any of you make a decision, I need to tell you something I should have said from the beginning. The room was utterly still. 38 years ago, a man named James Rachel ran into a burning building called the Whitmore and saved 7 people. One of them was my mother, Eleanor Monroe. She was 23 years old and 6 months pregnant with me. Rachel pulled out her phone and connected it to the room's display screen. Her mother's photograph appeared. The young woman in front of the burned building, the firefighter with the kind eyes. James Rachel didn't ask for recognition. He didn't ask for money. He didn't even tell anyone his name. He just walked away, carrying burn scars that would eventually give him lung cancer and kill him. My mother spent the rest of her life trying to find him. She never did. Rachel turned to face the board directly. James Rachel was William's father. A murmur rippled through the room. Walter Pemberton leaned forward. I didn't know this when I helped William at the supermarket. I didn't know this when he started working here. I didn't know this when I proposed the Rachel Foundation. I only discovered the connection months later when I saw his father's certificate hanging on his wall. She took a breath. But here's what I do know. I am alive because of what James Rachel did. I exist because a stranger decided that my mother's life was worth risking his own. And when I saw his son, a man with the same quiet dignity, the same refusal to ask for help, the same determination to earn his own way. I knew I had a choice to make. Rachel looked at the faces around the table. I could ignore the debt. I could pretend that my mother's story had nothing to do with me. Nothing to do with the man standing in that grocery store with his baby. Or I could do what James Rachel did. I could help someone without asking for credit, without expecting anything in return. She turned back to Walter Pemberton. I chose to help. And if that's a conflict of interest, if kindness is corruption, then I accept the consequences. Rachel reached into her briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. She walked to the head of the table and placed it in front of the chairman. This is my resignation. Effective immediately, I will continue the Rachel Foundation with my personal funds, not as CFO of Sterling Capital, but as a private citizen who believes in what we started. The room erupted in whispers. Walter Pemberton held up his hand for silence. Ms. Monroe, this is highly irregular. May I speak? Everyone turned. William had risen from his chair at the end of the table. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned with something Rachel hadn't seen before: conviction. My father taught me that a man earns his way. For most of my life, I thought that meant never accepting help, never showing weakness, never admitting that I couldn't do it alone. He looked at Rachel. When she gave me that gift card in the parking lot, I wanted to throw it back in her face. I didn't know her. I didn't trust her. And I sure as hell didn't want her pity. William turned to the board. But she didn't give me pity. She gave me what my father gave her mother, a chance, not charity, not a handout. Just one person saying to another, I see you. I believe you can do better. Let me help you get there. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. His father in his firefighter's uniform, young and strong before the cancer took hold. This is James Rachel. He never wanted recognition. He never wanted his name on a building or a foundation. But I know, he would have been proud to see his legacy used this way, helping people who have nothing, giving them the same chance he gave Eleanor Monroe. William placed the photograph on the table. Ms. Monroe didn't give me special treatment. She gave me back something my father left behind, the belief that one person can change another person's life. I'm not here because I'm sleeping with the CFO. I'm here because I'm my father's son, and I intend to live up to that. The boardroom was silent. Walter Pemberton picked up Rachel's resignation letter and studied it for a long moment. Then he looked at the photograph of James Rachel, at the image of Eleanor Monroe on the screen, at William standing tall despite everything. I knew about the Whitmore fire, he said quietly. My brother lived in that building, 3rd floor. A man carried him out on his back, wouldn't even give his name afterward. He set down the letter. It seems James Rachel saved more than one person that night. The vote was called an hour later. The board decided unanimously the Rachel Foundation would continue, fully funded by Sterling Capital. Rachel's resignation was declined. Instead, she was offered a new position, senior advisor to the foundation, with reduced corporate responsibilities and a mandate to expand the program nationwide. William's suspension was lifted. He was promoted to Community Outreach Coordinator for the Rachel Foundation, the first beneficiary to become a leader in the very program that had changed his life. The headlines the next day read, CFO's act of kindness reveals decades-old debt. Sterling Capital pledges millions to single-parent families. 5 years later, William Rachel stood in the lobby of the first Rachel Foundation Community Center, watching families stream through the doors. Over 2,000 single parents had been served by the program: job training, child care support, housing assistance, emergency funds, everything William had once desperately needed. Eli was 5 years old now, healthy and happy, starting kindergarten in the fall. He stood beside his father, holding a pair of scissors for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. On the wall behind them hung 2 photographs, The first was James Rachel's original certificate from 1986. The second was a new picture, William, Eli, and Rachel standing together at the groundbreaking ceremony, shovels in hand, smiling. Rachel walked over to join them. She was different now, softer somehow, the sharp edges of her loneliness worn smooth by 5 years of something she had never expected to find. Family. "You ready?" she asked William. "As I'll ever be." They cut the ribbon together. The crowd applauded. Eli laughed and clapped his hands. That evening, William and Eli stopped at Franklin's grocery on their way home, the same store where everything had begun. At the checkout counter, a young mother was counting coins, her toddler fussing in the cart beside her. She was short. William could see it in the slump of her shoulders, the way she avoided the cashier's eyes. He walked up to the counter and placed a gift card beside her groceries. The woman looked at him, startled. "I can't take this." "You're not taking it," William said, smiling. "Someone gave it to me once. I'm just passing it on." She stared at him for a moment, tears forming in her eyes. Then she picked up the card and whispered, "Thank you." Eli tugged at William's sleeve as they walked toward the exit. "Daddy, who gave it to you?" William looked through the window at the parking lot, where Rachel was waiting in her car. Still a Mercedes, still black, but somehow less imposing now. She waved at them through the glass. "Someone who understood that kindness is never alone," William said. "It's a gift that keeps moving." They walked out into the evening air, father and son, into a world that was just a little bit better than it had been 5 years ago. And somewhere, James Rachel was smiling.